Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us on today's panel discussion webinar, How to Improve Threat Intelligence with Advanced Analytics, brought to you by the ITGRC Forum. I'm Kelly Vick, the host of the program, and it's my pleasure to welcome today's speakers. Our moderator is Colin Whitaker. Colin is the founder and director of Informed Risk Decisions and has over 30 years' experience in cybersecurity, and he currently provides cybersecurity risk consultancy services to a wide range of public and private companies. Colin has presented on information security at major events around the world and has published a number of papers on security. And on the panel, welcome Doveler, Security Research Lead at CyberSixGill, Alan Liska, Senior Security Architect and Ransomware Specialist at Recorded Future, Colin Connor, X-Force Intel Manager at IBM Security, and Eric Lincoln, Principal AI Researcher at Rapid7. We'll get to introductions in a moment, but first, a short housekeeping video. We'll be right back after this.
The ITGRC Forum, educational content for governance, risk management, and compliance professionals. A forum for thought leaders to address today's GRC and IT security topics.
Taking that threat intelligence and using that as an overlay in your existing systems becomes really important.
There is a big difference in service providers versus other third parties that you might be providing data to.
It highlights organizations' lack of preparedness for situations like this.
Here are some housekeeping notes to keep in mind. This webcast is interactive and we want your questions. Please submit these at any time using the Questions tab and we'll address as many of these as possible during the webinar. We've also lined up some polls to get your input and we'll notify you when these are active. So please be ready to submit your response when prompted by using the box below your console. Just make sure the slides are not in full screen mode or you will not see the options. We have uploaded a number of supporting resources in the Attachments tab, so be sure to check those out. We want to hear from you, so don't forget to leave your feedback and comments. We take feedback seriously and it helps us plan for future programs. Today's program is approved by NASBA. To qualify for CPE credit, you must demonstrate participation by attending the full session, responding to the polls, and by rating us at the end. Certificates will be issued within 7 days from our learning management system, the GRC CPE Academy. So please watch out for the email notification and check your spam folder if that doesn't come through. If the presentation freezes, please refresh your browser and close any other live windows to avoid conflicts. After the live presentation, this webcast will be available on demand, so please share with any colleagues who you think will be interested in the topic. And now, let's get started.
Okay, so on today's program, we'll address how advanced analytics and machine learning can power threat intelligence and enable threat researchers to differentiate between advanced analytics, automation, and artificial intelligence. Translate intelligence into risk to gain total visibility of your attack surface and better determine what you need to do to prevent attacks. Operationalize intelligence data to conduct qualified and detailed threat assessments that can help keep your business secure. And use the attack knowledge base in your security strategy. Moving on to the agenda, we'll begin with speaker introductions before running over some quick tips recommended by our panel, and then we'll dive into the Q&A discussion facilitated by Colin before closing with takeaways and further information at the end. So now, without further ado, over to you, Colin.
Thank you very much indeed, Kelly, and good afternoon, everyone. To start with, we're going to run around this virtual table. We're all sitting here, and we're going to hear from each of our panelists. I'm going to invite them to tell us a little about their organization, a little bit more about themselves, so that everyone listening today, either live or on the archives, can understand the frame of reference for our conversation this afternoon. And I'll start with Dov. Dov, good afternoon, and welcome. Can I ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself and the work you're doing at CyberSixGill, sir?
Sure. Hi, my name is Doveler. I am the lead researcher at CyberSixGill. I focus on malware and fraud on the dark web. So CyberSixGill collects from a tremendous number of deep and dark web sources, as well as beyond that, the entire cyber criminal underground. And we try to figure out what's out there and what we can do to really take that massive bulk of data and provide what's actionable intelligence for our customers. So we have an investigative portal which accesses this deep and dark web, so anyone can search freely in our database. We're collecting 6-7 million intelligence items every single day. And we also have an alerting mechanism as well as notifications, so clients will understand how their assets are being affected and what context their assets are being mentioned, and if what they should do about it, as well as choose their own adventure and figure out really what we have within this data lake.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Dov. I'm looking forward to hearing your contributions this afternoon, so thank you for that. I'd now like to welcome Alan. Alan, welcome back. It's great to speak to you again, and we're looking forward to talking and continuing our conversation on all things risk and threat. So over to you. Tell us about yourself and what you're doing at Recorded Future these days.
Sure. So, Colin, it's really interesting, Colin. When I first started doing these events with you, the focus was on justifying threat intelligence, and now we've moved to how the assumption is almost you have to have threat intelligence, and we how to make better use of your threat intelligence. So I love that we've made that kind of progress. About me, so I'm an intelligence analyst at Recorded Future. I'm actually part of our CSART team, so I help secure our own network, as well as a ransomware researcher. I've been doing this for a really long time, and basically spend my day trying to figure out what the bad guys are doing and help our own internal network as well as our client networks. As far as Recorded Future, basically what we try and do is help turn all sources of data into actionable intelligence. So whether that's technical collection, pulling down C2 information, to open web sources, dark web sources, our own individual research, proprietary technical sources, and of course, data that we get from our customers, structure it, analyze it, and then deliver it to our clients, whether that's through our portal, through the API, through a browser extension, or through finished intelligence reporting. We've been doing this for a really long time, and continue to strive to improve ways of better serving our clients with, again, more actionable and reliable intelligence.
Thanks very much indeed for that, Alan. Great to have you on the panel again. Colin, welcome to the panel. Please can you tell us about yourself and the work you're doing at IBM's X-Force Threat Hunt and Discovery team? And that's a mouthful and a half, isn't it?
So myself, I've been doing this for 23 years. People ask me how I got started in security. I did, 23 years ago, definitely different than today. But throughout that time, I've worked with many brands you guys know well, protect really risk from that perspective. And here at IBM, that's where we focus, right? To help our clients protect risk. That I lead the intelligence threat hunt and discovery team. What does that mean? What I like to say is my 3 Ps. We predict, prevent, as well as that provide proactive intelligence. So be able to see those oncoming storms, be able to reduce the SOC activities that they don't have to respond to, and then the things that do slip through that we're prepared from a memory muscle standpoint. Here at IBM Security, I think most of us know IBM. We've been around here for quite some time. IBM Security X-Force specifically is the group, the team I'm with, that we help to solve many of your challenges. Not only from the technical standpoint, but your threat and vulnerability landscape is very complex. You have employees, vendors, internet-connected devices, remote locations, data flowing across systems, across vendors. Attackers have become more advanced, more scalable, and in many cases, very professional, very commoditized. They run their own criminal activities like a business, a vast number of resources. The combination has been insurmountable. We're here to help you solve those problems, whether it's the visibility, whether it's the vulnerability, whether it's bringing in an investigation and doing details, as well as for my team, we support from the intelligence standpoint, that who did it, why did they do it, and what would they like to have stolen if we've not seen the evidence, etc. From overall, we're looking to help you gain board buy-in in your security investments. Not just that we need to implement these controls, but really, like I said, the risk. Where are we reducing the risk? Boards are so focused on patch everything. We know that's consuming, timely, and resource straining. It's not the most effective way to reduce risk. We're here to help you.
Thanks very much indeed, Colin. Right, finally, and certainly not least, and my apologies for being last, it's over to Eric. Welcome. Can you tell us about yourself and your role at Rapid7, Eric?
Yeah, definitely. Happy to do it, and happy to be here. Yeah, it's a great panel. So I've been in security for the entirety of my adult life, and depending on how you count it, probably a little bit before then too. I, got my start just doing the same sort of stuff you would expect, little, computer mischief, right? And then over time, I worked in the federal government. I worked for a number of different firms outside of the federal government. And, so I came from that sort of like gray hat hacker background. And, the longer I spent in the field, the more I found that there's just way too much for one person to do all by their lonesome. So that's kind of what pushed me into artificial intelligence, right? And starting to research artificial intelligence. So now I'm at Rapid7 and I work across our product portfolio, including, on Threat Command, but also our broader product portfolio, our detection and response, our vulnerability management, and all of that, to take all of that information, that deluge of information from, the deep and dark web, sure, but also like from Twitter, where there's actually a surprising amount of really good information, and also a ton of completely useless information, or sometimes even actively detrimental information, right? And try and sort all that out so that all of our products can be smarter. And, with things like Threat Command, our customers can sort of take all of that noise and sort of ignore it so that they can focus on the threats and the chatter that's out there that's relevant to them, right? So that's kind of the long and the short of it, of what I do.
Thank you very much, Eric. I think the audience will now appreciate we've really got a crop of talent on the panel this afternoon to talk about threat stuff. So I'm really pleased about that. So thank you very much for joining us, guys. So to kick things off, we've asked our panelists to identify a number of what we like to call quick tips, as I'll put them in quotes, for you to help you focus on the key issues on dealing with threat intelligence. These are basically deriving insights from quantitative intelligence, knowing what you're going to use it for, which is clearly an important thing if you're going to gather intelligence, understanding where your data is, because at least then you can start to manage what you're trying to defend, and making sure your analytical tools support your team's needs. I'm going to bring each of our panelists in to tell a little about their own particular quick tips. So I'm going to start with yourself, Dev. Can you explain what you mean by quantitative intelligence and how we can gain insights from it?
Yeah, so quantitative intelligence, I would say that, any intelligence can be either quantitative or qualitative, right? So quantitative intelligence means the number of, the numbers, right? What are numbers, raw figures, and what can we do with this to derive trends? So for example, we can take the number of mentions of a cybercrime or a TTP over time, and that could be an interesting trend line. So I just gave two graphs here. So for example, the sale of documents on Telegram, that's whether it's counterfeit documents, forged documents, or stolen ones, that's trending upwards. That's something that's a really cool data point. We're talking about 140,000 a month. What does that mean? Netflix and Disney Plus accounts. Each of these is a verified username and password that I got from our data lake, unique, right? So there's no duplicates here. From January 2020 until March 21, that number went down a lot. What does this mean about account takeover and credential stuffing and distribution of those accounts on the deep and dark web? So again, we have one trending upwards and one downwards. The second is the number of items for sale in markets, and their prices can shed light on the supply and demand. We can understand the underground economy based on this. So for example, compromised endpoints for sale in initial access broker markets, 2020 to 2021 went way up, right? And we know that ransomware groups are buying access from these markets. That's something that's really cool. I want to do something with this data. I'm looking at it and like, okay, what does this mean? Prices of compromised credit cards, on the other hand, went down. Again, this is an insight that means something. And then the last one is the number of unique actors and sites related to a TTP can indicate how widespread it is. So the number of active ransomware groups every month trending upwards again over the last 2 years. And the bottom one, I really like this. We collect from a lot of Telegram and other chat channels. And this is the number of unique actors per channel during the meme stock boom exactly a year ago. And you can see how it skyrocketed as well, right? So every one of these points is a unique actor. Again, you could take this data and you could do really, really cool things with it just by understanding quantitatively what's going on.
Absolutely right. And it takes me back about 15 years ago when we were actually managing the banking threats in UK. We were doing exactly this sort of thing against the threats, the techniques that were being used and all that sort of stuff here, and particularly compromised credit cards and all the rest of it. So it's really important to provide strategic insight to drive decision making. So thank you for stressing. That's really, really very valuable indeed. And the point I'm making there is any intelligence has to be of value if you're going to gather intelligence, or else there's no point in gathering it. So, Alan, can you offer some insights for the ways in which intelligence can be used?
Yeah. So one of the things that I think is really important to understand is that proper threat intelligence helps you know when to stand up as well as when to stand down. And both of those are equally important. We've talked already, we've talked a few times about vulnerability intelligence and how important that is. We all know the weaknesses of basing your vulnerability management program on CVSS scoring, because CVSS scoring is an incomplete measurement of the actual risk of a vulnerability. And so that's one example of where you can use it. Something may come out with a CVSS score of 9, but maybe it's not being actively exploited in the wild, or maybe it is really hard to actually exploit. Like if somebody were to figure it out, it's really bad, or there's no proof of concept code released, or any one of these other things. So especially in vulnerability management, where teams are already overwhelmed with all the patching they have to do, being able to use intelligence to say, no, these 5 things actually need to be patched first. These, even if they're higher score, can wait a little bit longer to be patched. That's good. And then as the situation changes, last week we told you this could wait. Now we're telling you this can't wait because now there is proof of concept code out there. So that's one sort of real world example of how threat intelligence helps in both ways. It gives you the information you need to take proper action on how to plan out your patching, which is, again, just one sub area, but I think a really important one.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more, and I'm just really pleased that you made the point about it's not intelligence isn't about just making you actively do something. It's actually stopping you do things that you don't need to do, and I think that is a really important, valuable point for any intelligence out there. So thank you for that, Alan. I was pleased when you added that as your quick tip. So many thanks. And the point you're making there about applying it to your own environment in patching is very important, because otherwise it's not of value. So, Colin, from your perspective, can you explain what we need to understand, particularly from our own data, and what you think it can tell us about what we need to do in respect of gathering intelligence?
Yeah, thanks, Colin. And as Sun Tzu said in The Art of War, know your enemy, know yourself, right? So I think, us as security practitioners often say, I need to go buy this, I need to go buy that. But a lot of times we already have a lot of what we need already in hand. We're just not analyzing it. In the case of this webinar, advanced analyzing it, right? So mapping out that data, both internally and externally. So internally, look in some of your sources, using MITRE ATT&CK as a framework is a great example. Which things would indicate initial access, which things would initiate or indicate execution, maybe some of the other parts and pieces of the MITRE ATT&CK framework. If you can start to identify what data you have and how you're utilizing it today, you might say, oh, we're not utilizing this data today, HR data, for example, that the way we should. That internally, if I can map some of my events that occur from a security standpoint, I can not only enable the SOC, I can start to look for trends and other activities, much like Dev was mentioning on the dark web, in my own internal data. I can say that, okay, here are my most frequently attacked individuals. I can say that here's some incidents that have maybe executives included in there, that be able to prioritize the data on the people, the function of the system, as well as the data present, and maybe even often the impact. Sometimes we don't see that as much, is very helpful. The challenge, of course, is that some of our sources are not as reliable and credible. I've been working with a client here and was doing some analysis on some of their threat feeds, and mostly noise. So be careful of bringing in data externally and understand, the reliability and credibility. Even some of your internal data may have some things that are misleading. So be mindful of that. That's my quick tip, Colin. Back to you.
Thanks very much indeed. You all three of you so far have actually stressed the amount of, particularly the volume of data we're all dealing with here. So, let's talk to Eric. Eric, how do we manage the analytical tools required to our threat team's going to need? Because there's a huge amount of data out there, huge volume out there.
Yeah. So, I actually really liked what Alan had to say about that, which is that, you've got to make it useful, right? You have to make it actually actionable. And so the key is to develop these things kind of in concert with the teams that are going to use them, right? So if we have a patch management team and we tell them, hey, our mean time to patch is whatever. Okay, sure, that's fine to know. That doesn't tell me what to do differently. It just tells me kind of how we're doing. If you tell me Microsoft Exchange is being actively exploited in the wild, then we go, oh, we need to have visibility into our Exchange servers, right? And maybe, right, maybe our needs will change. Maybe we move everything to the cloud. Maybe we just don't do anything on-prem anymore. Well, then some of the stuff that we have, some of the analytics that we've built, some of the systems that we've put in place aren't going to be useful anymore, right? That's not helping us. So the needs have changed, right? As we get better, right? If we go from, say, being kind of a smaller company with a really small footprint and really good asset counts to having these huge distributed systems across maybe multiple campuses, and then we have multiple AWS accounts, and maybe somebody puts something in GCP and some team wants to be in Azure. Now our needs have changed. And so we have to think about what we are counting and how we're dealing with that, right? So kind of the thing I want people to take away, this quick tip, is that, this should not be a set it and forget it kind of thing. You don't buy an analytic and now you have it. You don't hire a contractor to build you an analytic and then you have it. It's something that needs to evolve and change, because these things are going to need to incorporate different data sources, and they may even just not be useful anymore, right? And you need to completely change the way that you look at things.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Steve, for that, Eric. I think that's really useful quick tips, which I know we're going to explore as we go through this conversation this afternoon. And looking at some of the questions already coming in, I think they're already picking up some of the points you guys have already made. So as we go through the conversation, I'm sure we're going to dig into those a lot deeper. So it sets up very nicely the discussion. We've got the headshots up there as well as our video feeds, so you know who's going to be talking. You can relate to our affiliation, so you can put even deeper context into the things we're saying. I want to remind everyone out there in the audience, this is an interactive conversation. You're part of that conversation as well. So please feel free, as the people have already, start adding your questions to the question tab, and I'll look at it and I will feed your questions as we're going through to the conversation this afternoon to the panelists. Let me say, as you can see from my room, I used to be a soldier, and I really get the importance of being understanding the importance of understanding the threat. To me, it's a no-brainer. And understanding sound intelligence behind it, you can't manage without it. And when I retired from the military and went into the civilian world and the commercial world, along with everyone else out there, one of the things I was trying to do was try to evangelize the importance of intelligence to really substantiate the benefits of doing threat assessments, particularly trying to apply threats to understand who might target assets and understanding how you might exploit vulnerabilities that are protecting those assets, because that will help make a more informed and a more rounded risk decision, which can have some more substantive insights and benefit when you talk to senior management about trying to take action. And I've actually achieved significant success in being able to do that in the past. So I'm very thrilled to be part of this conversation this afternoon and help facilitate this webinar, one which I hope lead you through a journey of just understanding what intelligence is and where you can find it, try to understand what tools are available, and then try and look to the future to try and see what we might need to do more as we go up this maturity curve of using threat intelligence. So I think we need to start at the basics before we go on. We've had some good quick tips. So let's cut to the chase. Information and sources are everywhere. We all know that. They've all our panelists have already mentioned that. So I'm going to turn to yourself, Dov. Dov, how do you sort the wheat from the chaff? This has already come up already. How do you distinguish what intelligence is valuable or what is not valuable?
So that's a great question, and one of the fundamental challenges for any security or intelligence analyst. I would say the way to do that is actually, I presented the quantitative angle, is to pivot back and forth between quantitative and qualitative, right? So for example, the graph is trending upwards. Why? There's a spike. Why? So you pivot from that big spike, right? You go into there and then you zoom in and say, why was there a spike here? It could have just been because there's one actor that was very spammy and said the same thing 50,000 times. And so that explains that. Or it could be that there's a real trend going on. So I think you need to match both of them, right? To do only the qualitative, you're missing the bigger picture. And to do only the quantitative, then you're basically saying, okay, here's the graph. This graph is the truth, and let's move on with our lives. You really need both. I would say another example of that we have also a vulnerability assessment feature, right, where it's we're giving a feed with scores for each CVE, and yes, you have a score, right? So we're scoring things on a 1 to 10 scale. But if you just take a company's score for something and treat that as, okay, they gave this a score, let's just accept this with our eyes closed. Don't do that. That's a problem. You can't just accept these black box scores. We provide why the score is what it is. This explanation, there's an exploit on GitHub that was shared, exploit DB, things like that. And so you're matching the quantitative analytics with the qualitative explanation for why. That's the only way to do it. It might take more time, but it's the honest way to really be able to understand what's the value, what's the insight that we get from this, and what can we discard.
In other words, what you're really saying is you need the human in the loop to ask these curious questions, to actually take that basic facts and work out what does it mean to you. And really that person's got to be inside the organization. He's got to understand your business, how you do things, what the pattern of behavior is. That's really where you're coming from, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Right. The numbers are important. And I'm a numbers person, but the numbers can only take you so far. You need a human to know what is the significance of this, and the machine can't do that.
Absolutely right. Okay, so if we're starting at the beginning, then perhaps we should also help understand where we can get the information from, intelligence from. With that in mind, we're going to conduct our very first poll of the evening. So this is really quick and short and sharp for you guys. It's about where do you find the most effective intelligence. There are 4 options there. And please feel free to click on the polls and actually provide your response. Remember not to be in full screen mode or you won't see the questions beneath the screen. So while you're doing that, it's clear that intelligence can come in many different forms. We've already heard that from our panelists this afternoon. Therefore, let's get a view on what we do about this challenge. Alan, intelligence takes many forms, as we've heard, from vulnerabilities to strategic stuff to dark web stuff, etc. How do you normalize it across platforms?
Well, and I think what's interesting is I think both Colin and Eric have touched on this a little bit already. The trick is that you have to have the tools, the right tools inside of your organization in order to do that, whether that's your SIM, whether that's your SOAR, or your TIP platform, whatever it is. But I think that what's important is that normalization has to take place across one system. And it has to, you can't have a different tool, and I'm kind of stumbling with what I'm trying to say here, so hopefully somebody will pick up on this, but you can't have a different tool for different types of intelligence. You have to be able to normalize that across everything. So like you can't have your vulnerability intelligence in one platform and your asset management in another platform. Otherwise, it doesn't do you any good because you have a whole bunch of vulnerability management without any context inside your network. You can't have a bunch of information about what your assets look like, and then information about what is potentially attacking them in another place. So you really need whatever that centralized platform is. And I think, Eric really hit this hard. This is an ongoing process. I've seen this happen too often, especially like with SOARs. Somebody will come in and they'll set up a SOAR. 6 months later, your SOAR is no longer effective because your processes have changed, your personnel have changed, your network view has changed. You have to continuously update that. So to me, it's not necessarily, I got to get the latest whiz bang tool. I have to use what tool I have most effectively, and I have to continually update that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I mean, it's also reinforcing the question that when you're in the intelligence business, we all talk about an intelligence cycle. And that means that you have to go around. And that means you have to ask the question again and again as you go around the cycle, what do I need intelligence about? Which is what Eric's saying. As the environment changes and technology changes, you go around the cycle again because you ask different questions and you need different answers. And you need different tools to gather that information and fuse it in one place. So Alan, the results are in. What do you think of the answers from the audience about where they're gathering information from?
I love the most popular answer is ISACs, that the industry groups are the ones, because that means that they're doing their jobs, right? And again, you and I have been doing this for a long time, Colin. We know that wasn't always the case. So it's great to see that these industry groups are now stepping up and they're providing relevant and important intelligence to their members. And making sure that they're getting stuff that is, because they're going to be the ones that can provide the most actionable and the most relevant intelligence because they're closest to that industry. So I think that's great. I'm sure the 3% that chose other are in the Twitter field that Eric mentioned early on, that, there's a lot of great intelligence there, and actually getting the right information is important. And also I like the fact that, there's that 10% that really is doing that in-house, that's bringing some of these activities in-house, hiring their own analysts and so on. Again, 10 years ago, intelligence analyst was a thing that governments had and, the big banks had and nobody else. But I'm seeing intelligence analysts becoming a more popular and a more common activity in other types of organizations as well. And I think that's great.
Yeah, and I think the important thing about these ISACs is that they are a huge valuable tool for peer industries to gather together to share information. They're very difficult to start. I've been involved with lots of them in the past. Someone has to come to the table first to bare their soul, don't they? Yeah. To actually establish and generate trust so that you can then start to share information. Though.
Right. And it's really hard when you're first getting started to be able to share information. We're all somewhat competitors on this forum. But we all have our private forums where we're sharing this kind of information because, I know it's a kind of cliche to say, but the rising tide raises all boats. And I think that's really true. We need to help each other out, competitors and, and non-competitors, to make sure that everybody's got the information they need to secure. I'd love to be able to shut down my InfoSec career and go buy a vineyard in Bordeaux and just grow grapes for the rest of my life. But, for right now, I'm needed. So
yeah. I know that feeling, Alan. You made that point brilliantly about analytics and how they need to evolve and change and contribute to Eric's discussion. So, Colin, can I turn to yourself? Where do people start their journey when they're talking about analytics? Where would you advise someone to start thinking about this?
Great question. I think from a security standpoint, we always try to focus on technology first, but we see many problems with that. It's always the people, process, and technology, how you govern those and how you execute those, how you operationalize those. So, from starting out, I always recommend going back to a little bit what Eric was saying in his quick tips. Understand your business. Understand what questions you're trying to answer. That and actually, where are some of the business points, business pain points? Maybe it's looking at the annual risk or annual report on the business, or maybe it's even looking at past incidents. What problems are we trying to solve? Is it, I've seen teams trying to attempt prioritize vulnerabilities that the risk management, the vulnerability management team is using CVS to be able to prioritize. And we're not seeing a whole lot of impact of intelligence, reprioritizing those things. Where we're seeing intelligence is those attacks in the wild or the proof of concept, those changes that CVSS score doesn't answer. So being able to pick either whether it's a vulnerability management and whether it's SOC or maybe executive insights, pick one of those key areas that you want to focus on. Here's some questions we want to be able to address. And as I mentioned earlier, be able to predict those or be able to protect against those or be able to put proactive planning in place. Maybe it's ransomware, as Alan has written a book recently on that, right? And maybe it's ransomware we want to prepare. Okay, we know we can't stop all of the compromises, but how can we mitigate when a compromise makes it in the network? Let's understand what those ransomware groups are doing and identify how we can discover those things. So if we can keep it simple and gain success on that, we can continue to add in things and then add in technologies to make our analysts more effective and more efficient. That as we started out with, the size of data we're analyzing here is insurmountable. But if we start asking and try to answer specific questions, we can continue to make progress there and not make it overcomplicated, but gain success and momentum from that.
Thanks for that, Colin. I mean, it's a brilliant lead in to Eric. I mean, one of the challenges I see in this space is that there are a variety of, coming from the vendor community, with due humbleness talking to you guys over on the end there, is there's a lot of mixed language out there. So people talk about advanced analytics, automation, artificial intelligence. Can you explain, Eric, where these fit into the spectrum of tool capabilities out there and what those terms mean in your respect and come to threat intelligence?
Yes, and this is actually my favorite question on Earth to answer, and so I'll try not to take up the rest of our entire afternoon over this one. So I think the way to think about it is that they're this Venn diagram, and there are parts where they overlap and parts where they very much do not. So when we talk about analytics, and when people use the term analytics, the way it should be used, right? There's a little bit of opinion here, is that an analytic is something that is looking backwards and it's frozen in time, right? So when you use analytics to say, how many things did we sell, right? That's an analytic. If you want to be a little bit predictive, you can generate like a simple model and you can say, in a month like this, or in a year like this, how many would we sell, right? If we had last year's growth and this year's, numbers, what would this year look like? That's an analytic, right? They're these kind of simple statistical models or simple regression models that can tell you things, right? Automation tends to get conflated here because a lot of folks think about what you do next, right? So if my security analytic tells me you are extremely vulnerable to this thing, right? Like you just have, I don't know, for some reason your entire network is vulnerable to MS17010 because apparently your network just got frozen in 2017 and it just came back online today, right? Right. So automation would go, oh, we need to patch this right away. This is our number one vulnerability. Let's take an action automatically, right? If this condition is met, do this thing automatically, right? And that tends to get blurry with artificial intelligence, which is this big term that means everything and consequently nothing at all. And I say that as an artificial intelligence researcher. That's my literal job. So, right, a lot of people come and they say, oh, can you use AI to like automatically figure out what is going to be exploited and then just like, get ahead of it? That's not really how that works. So what artificial intelligence does is, in contrast with analytics, you have to know what question you're asking, right? And you kind of build on that. With artificial intelligence, you don't you should know what question you're asking. It's better if you do. But sometimes you can start with things like, I want just like a summary, right? If I get 700,000 tweets tomorrow based on my filters, and I don't want to just set like specific word filters, I want to detect things that are like probably useful. Then, like, other than just filtering for like Will Dorman and Kevin Beaumont, you can start to let the machine learn, like, tweets that look like this are useful and tweets that look like this are not. And that's not really an analytic. It kind of grows as it sees the data. It learns what's useful and what's not based on a set of examples where you've said these are useful and these aren't, right? So it's kind of just it lets it be more of a moving target, right? It's a bit more flexible.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks for that very much indeed. I mean, from my perspective, I think you're absolutely right. Automation does get conflated with both of the terms. But anything you do, in my view, you just have to keep the human in the loop. Someone has to make that decision about, because humans ask curious questions that sometimes machines aren't capable of asking. And I think that's the only thing I would certainly add to your discussion. So thank you very much for that. We're now going on to our next poll, and it's really all about asking you guys out there in the audience, how, if you had some quantitative intelligence, how would you use it within your organization? So the poll's again live, so please feel free to answer, and we will come back to your answers in a moment. And while you're looking at that, I'm going to turn to Dov. Dov, how do you operationalize the data to make decisions? I mean, we heard a bit earlier on from Alan in respect of patching and how it might apply that space. So can you give some more thoughts about how you would operationalize that data and how you use it within an organization?
Yeah, so I think the question really goes down to what is the purpose of intelligence, and I think it was said earlier that yes, intelligence has been accepted, that it's a necessary thing. Everyone needs threat intelligence, but no one, but it's not universally understood in my experience why we need threat intelligence. And what I personally like to say is that threat intelligence is here to help organizations make better decisions. And those decisions are strategic. So what is the entire threat landscape? What are the threats that are emerging, developing, present, and maybe even in the future? And that helps organizations dedicate resources towards their InfoSec programs. That's a very high level, big decision. On the operational level, it's about optimizing controls. We already have an InfoSec program. How do we fine tune our controls that we already have, the people, processes, and technologies, towards protecting ourselves against these threats, right? We're already paying for a vulnerability management program. We already have that, but we want to prioritize which vulnerabilities are the most important to protect against. And then tactically, it's blocking IOCs, it's discovering compromised credentials. It's those are very straightforward, basic things. So intelligence is there to help us make better decisions. That's what intelligence provides. Quantitative analysis helps at all those levels, just like qualitative does as well, right? You need these trends on the highest level. How is ransomware going? Are there more or fewer ransomware attacks? And on the most basic level of account takeover, are there more or fewer Netflix credentials available on the underground? So as long as you're approaching this with the right questions and the right organizational processes, that you're open towards accepting the threat intelligence, because a lot of organizations, okay, we have a brilliant team of analysts, they write fantastic reports and no one reads them. Organizations need to be receptive and open to accepting the threat intel. And then once they are, they can ask the right questions, issue the right PIR, and then they'll get good answers back from the team.
Okay, that's very sensible. I mean, I think you, like me, coming very much from a strategic perspective, which I welcome, but it's also important to understand the tactical component. And I'm interested in the answers, because the answers to the polls are in. And it's interesting how many people feel that the threats, doing threat intelligence and quantitative intelligence, helps people gather insights to help optimize existing security controls. No one found it unhelpful, which was brilliant. So what's your take on the answers from the audience?
Sorry, I'm trying to find the question.
Oh, it's okay.
Here we go. Wait.
Yeah.
Okay, so it was actually a tie between understand emerging cyber risks and how optimize existing controls. I think that's very good, right? If actors are providing, yeah, I mean, again, understanding emerging risks, right? I think one thing we see in the criminal underground is there's a lot of learning going on, right? Just like we heard here that the good guys, the defenders need to share. The attackers are absolutely sharing and learning from one another. So one person discovers a vulnerability or even an effective social engineering technique, and then and they share their successes. All of a sudden, we're going to see an exponential growth in this type of attack. And so you can track that, right? If you have the quantitative insights where you can follow what's going on, you see that, and I know we're all sick and tired of exponential curves by 2022, but you can see that happening as well. And then optimizing controls also, because you're understanding where are they coming from. Ultimately, attackers are trying to take the low-hanging fruit. They're going to come in the path of least resistance. And so if you can identify how they're attacking everyone else, they're coming after you in the same way. And so then you can tune your controls. And by tuning your controls, you're minimizing business impact of your security program.
Yeah.
So you're optimizing your security, right? You don't want to block every email with attachments. That's bad. But if they're sending malicious ISO files, okay, so then we'll check those above everyone else.
That's brilliant. Thanks very much, indeed. I'm just so thrilled that no one found it unhelpful.
I would be very offended if they did.
Well, I know, but it's wonderful to see. So thanks for that. Brilliant. In my opening statement, and we've already discussed this already, about how we make a big case for using threat intel's contribution to understanding risks. It's been the continuing theme of the conversation. We're going to ask what I'd really like to do is get some more insights into that, how you go about doing that. So, Alan, can you give me your views of what recommendations you would make to our audience about how they go about translating this into defining better risk statements out there?
Yeah. So, I really loved what Dove had to say. In fact, I wrote it down, that, a lot of organizations don't know why they need threat intelligence. And I think that's a really important. Salespeople don't bring me on calls anymore because there are too many times where I've sat down in an organization and said, I don't think you're ready for what we offer yet. Here's kind of what you need to do. And then we can have that conversation. I had a lot of black and blue shins from getting kicked under the table for saying that. But I think it's really important that you need to understand how and why you need threat intelligence. So how are you going to feed threat intelligence into your vulnerability program? Because if it's a PDF file that's sitting in an inbox, that doesn't help anybody. So do you have the capability to ingest APIs? Or if it is something that's coming in via email, how are you going to ingest that? How are you going to get that into your systems? One of the big things that we're seeing right now that I think has been really helpful, and this kind of tags into kind of how Dove finished his conversation, is using intelligence to build a threat hunting program and to go on hunting missions. That's a sort of a really great example of how, hey, we're seeing a big uptick in the use of Cobalt Strike, for example. Okay, what do we need to look for to find Cobalt Strike? Well, here, do we have the tools to even be able to detect it? Great, we do. Are we detecting it? Well, no, not really. Great. Can we use threat intelligence? Can we bring in those additional indicators to look for that? What indicators should we be looking for? So we can start a threat hunting program and then take that, and just like with the intelligence cycle, take what we did in our initial threat hunting program and then incorporate that as to part of our normal security controls. That's a really great example of how you can use threat intelligence that from other attacks that are happening to better protect yourself. Oh, we're seeing a lot of credential reuse attacks on RDP. How much RDP do we have exposed? Oh, all of it. Right up along the line with Eric's MS-1701. We have 27 RDP servers exposed, and we're not using two-factor authentication, and they all use administrator as username. maybe we should fix that, and what can we do to fix that? Those are the kind of things that threat intelligence can really help, that really can help with. Oh, and by the way, it looks like we have about 8,000 credentials exposed on underground markets for, current and past employees. We should also probably do something about that. So those are kind of ways that you can take that intelligence coming in and turn it into something practical and effective, and get immediate benefit from.
Yeah, and also translating that into strategic decisions about when you invest in MFA to solve these problems about passwords in the future, of course.
Right, of course, absolutely.
Which I mean, I think is, some of the issues about credential reuse these days are just, they're almost getting laughable, and therefore, if that's not driving people down the MFA strategy, then nothing will. So it's a real problem out there. So thanks for that, Alan. In the spirit of exploring how we use this intelligence, we're going to conduct our third poll. And we're really going to ask the question about what's your primary use of threat intelligence? And it's issues that we just mentioned about whether you use it strategically, tactically, or operational. So it'd be really good to get your feedback as an audience of how you use it. And I know quite a lot of you have already responded, so we'll come back to the answers in a moment. While we're doing that, we mentioned attack strategy is one of the themes of this. Now, I've been a great proponent of the attack strategy because I think the MITRE attack framework is a really valuable tool, and the first real major initiative to take us down the threat axis. So, Colin, from your perspective, how do you see enterprises using the MITRE attack framework in their security strategy in the future? You're on mute at the moment, Colin.
There we go. Technology. I see, many of our clients are already using MITRE attack today. Unfortunately, like many of the buzzwords, I need to add this. The question is, why do I need to add that? If I can map my data sources and even maybe some of my SOC use cases, and even some of my incidents, how did we detect this? We mentioned Cobalt Strike from that perspective. So command and control. What use cases do I have to detect command and control? Is that a gap in my defenses? So we can look at it from a defensive standpoint. We can also look at it from an attacker point of view. Here's the attackers that are attacking my industry or my geography, or their objective is assets that I have, that I maintain. Maybe it's credit cards, maybe it's credentials that we talked about, right? Dove had some charts there on some of the streaming services accounts, right? That we see these as some things that we need to protect against. Let's go and understand how they're compromising these. Are they compromising them with specific tools? Are they compromising them with specific behaviors that we can detect? Of course, MITRE attack has some of the initial access indicators, phishing, etc. That's, there was a question out there, do we use those? How do we integrate those? Those are often observations that have been seen in the past, right? If we look at the diamond model, that's the infrastructure that attackers can change very easily. Their capabilities that MITRE attack helps us understand that they're using PowerShell, or they're using Cobalt Strike, or they're doing certain obfuscation techniques. Help us understand the attackers, that we can start to see, okay, would we detect these things? So that not when the Cobalt Strike addresses change, but we have a mechanism that's dynamically updating those Cobalt Strikes, dynamically detecting some of these suspicious PowerShell executions, or maybe even some of the other activity.
Great stuff. The poll's answers are in. I mean, interestingly, vast majority of people see threat intelligence being used operationally, such as vulnerability prioritization, which I think is a superb example. Thanks for Alan for introducing it. But it seems to be less used in the executive reporting and in the SOC tactical area, which you're talking about. Do you think that is an area where there is a problem in translating threat intelligence early enough into that cycle?
Definitely. From a vulnerability management standpoint, we're often communicating CVSS scores. As we talked about, that's a point in time that if we go back to 2017 on Eric's, we talk about the Eternal Blue vulnerability, right? The vulnerability was released, or the patched by Microsoft. Then a month later, the shadow brokers released the proof of concept. Then a month after that, in May of 2017, the attacks started occurring with WannaCry. If we could go and look at some of that data that we can predict some of that, okay, this is a remote code exploit that we need to prioritize. And then it's a pivot point from an intelligence standpoint to be able to dig into, are we patched here, as well as these attacks in the wild, are we protected? And there's a sandbox domain here, have we whitelisted that? So we see that vulnerability prioritization time and time again. I think that is very integrated. The challenge with the SOC and incident response is data overload. That often we're bringing in a lot of data, correlating things, and what does it tell us? It tells us that we matched a block list, that or it tells us that somebody clicked on a phishing link. It doesn't tell us the business risk. And that's where we're trying to focus is, right, reduce business risk. We're no longer just an add-on, just a compliance factor. We're reducing business risk. Really, the last 10 years, security's been focused on that. So from a SOC and incident response standpoint, we need to do a better job of, being able to communicate it. And, some of the work that's been done with sticks and taxi has started to move that. We're no longer just, exchanging indicators, but we're exchanging contacts with that context. Yeah. That if we could understand that this is a Cobalt Strike command and control, and we match against that, that's huge. That if we match against a Tor node, Tor nodes also are used, Tor exit nodes are also used for Ubuntu repositories, NDP. We're creating a lot of noise and a lot of churn from the SOCs. We need to be able to, sift through that noise and be able to bring these things that are most relevant to the business, as well as that, the reduced noise. Because that Google and others are used, I saw a report on GitHub, being used again from a command and control standpoint. We start alerting on all that. There's malicious activity there, but then there's also, legitimate activity. And executive reporting, I think that's the challenge that we as intelligence continue to need to speak that risk language. Both from a cyber intelligence standpoint, enterprise risk management, or emerging fields, that we need to be able to speak that language of executives, that risk language. I did a webinar over in 2020 on that. And definitely, if you have a chance, hit me up on LinkedIn or go search for it.
Thanks very much indeed, Colin. We're now going over to our final poll, and we're curious to understand whether people are developing their own analytical solutions in-house because they know their problem, or whether they're actually buying stuff in from pre-built solutions from vendors, etc. So while you ponder that right, quite simple poll, I'll turn to Eric. Eric, I want to turn to you about one of the points we had there from Colin was all about the level of overload, particularly at the SOC end of the community. And someone's mentioned that already in one of the questions as a level of concern. What are the limitations of developing security analytics? Is the problem of overload particularly one of the issues of trying to scale analytics to solve those problems?
Yeah, so that I think we have two problems, and they're deeply related. But one of them is actually kind of a red herring, right? And the other one is actually like a huge problem that we don't have really a good answer to. So the red herring problem is this problem of too much data, right? And there is too much data. There's too much data because we can't process it all. But why can't we process it all, right? Because like look at the SEC, look at NASDAQ or stock exchanges, right? Like they have just as much data. And they process it just fine. So what's wrong with us? Well, in my experience, the problem is security data is really ugly. It's the ugliest data on earth. It's awful. There's no uniform format. There's no like common language that we speak. Like we have sticks and taxi for IOCs, but not everybody uses sticks and taxi. And we have MITRE ATT&CK, and that's okay. But how do you take your snort alerts and map them to MITRE ATT&CK, right? That's not done for you. You have to build that out, or you have to get someone to build that out. So, we have all of these different sources. We have events on endpoints, and we have PCAPs, and we have snort rules, and we have SIM rules, and we have, I don't know, what else do we have? Vulnerability alerts. We have all of the threat intelligence, which is just natural language, right? None of these things are actually the same format. And so it's really, really hard to just take all of that data and process it all at once because it's not in the same language, right? And so when we're building these analytics, kind of step one of all of this is to get everything into that sort of common format, that common platform, that common whatever, right? And I think Alan actually brought this up at the very beginning, right? That it can't all live in its own system, because I need my endpoint and my firewall to work together to tell me what's actually happening. And if I have to go into each system and understand each system individually, then I'm not scaling. And that's when the problem of data overload becomes a real problem, right? Because the data overload problem isn't a problem if we've already aggregated it and taken all the noise out and told you, like, yeah, this one's a false positive because of whatever, and this one's a true positive. That's what we rely on humans to do, right? So getting to the point where it's easy for humans to consume it is kind of the key. And so that really does require work, not just by practitioners who are in the field already struggling today, but by vendors and frankly by academics to help come up with clever ways to take these totally heterogeneous data sets and make them kind of work together.
Yeah, and there's been some work already in actually trying to normalize these into standard report formats, hasn't there? Which is, I don't think it's been as successful as it needs to be yet, but I think there's a lot of work to do there. So what's your take on the answer? I mean, it's almost 50-50 for those people who are developing in-house and buying. Is that what you're seeing yourself in your own market with your own clients?
So I think that it's interesting that it's split down the middle, and I wish I had more granularity as to what each one of these means. But it's hard to launch a last-minute poll to get people to give free response answers. But I think that this is pretty much on track with what I've seen, in the respect that a lot of people are building in-house because they have the capacity, right? They have data scientists, they have business analytics people, they have whoever, right? And at the same time, probably about half, and clearly at least about half of people are having to just take something and run with it, right? Yeah. Like, I just need something that works. I don't have the time or the money or the capacity to build my own. I just need something that works, and I need it today.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you very much, Lee, for that, Eric. We're going into sort of the last session here now, and I wanted to spend some time thinking about the future. I wanted to think about where we're going and what we might do differently in the future. So I'm going to turn to Dov first. I mean, Dov, you've got most experience here in this area. So how do you effectively translate dark web threat intelligence into business risk and communicate it to all levels in the organization? Because I think this is going to be a compelling theme in the future, isn't it?
So the book answer for this question is risk equals impact times probability. The quantitative data speaks to the probability, right? The quantitative intelligence, if everyone's talking about it, then there's a higher likelihood that you're going to get attacked, right? If everyone's talking about a vulnerability, then the vulnerability score, the risk score should be higher because people are talking about it, and the qualitative helps with the impact, right? The qualitative, you understand what this threat means, how this threat materializing would hit your organization, and again, probability and quantitative intelligence go hand in hand. So that's the book definition, which is helpful and useful, but it only takes you so far, because ultimately it's about agile processes within your organization. I think just like agile development is popular, intelligence needs to be agile as well. You can't have this the same intelligence cycle that came from Clausewitz. I mean, this is a 200-year-old model, and who thought that Clausewitz would get a shout out on this webinar? But that's a really old model, and if you're using that, you're going to be way too slow. Organizations need to be agile. The consumers of intelligence and the producers of intelligence within an organization, the Intel team, need to be in a constant conversation and explain what we have and what we need. And it needs to be this very tight loop. It can't be this, once every quarter, half a year, we tell you what we need to know. It really needs to be a much tighter loop. And that includes the remediation. Remediation can't be this, okay, we wrote a report, now you guys can have fun with it. It needs to be a very quick, automate as much as possible. And whatever can't be automated, then there has to be clear playbooks, calls to action, so the intelligence can be applied. So
thanks
again,
very much indeed for that, Dov. That's excellent. And it really reinforces the question that, actually trying to be agile, it means you've got to tighten up the cycle quick as possible, and therefore looking for new sources and new answers out there, including the dark web. So thank you for that. Alan, you and I have spoken about third-party risks many times in the past. How do you extend, if you're going to be mature in your use of threat assessments and threat intelligence, to engage your third parties with this sort of information?
And this is, again, one of these topics that we could have a whole separate conversation on. But at the very minimum, you need to understand the risk that your third parties pose to your organization, and that's becoming increasingly important. I've seen this recently in ransomware attacks, where as soon as a vendor finds out that you've been hit with a ransomware attack, they shut you off. Because there's too many, ransomware actors have gotten too good at jumping from one victim to another victim, and that's just one example. So understanding the risk that your partners pose to your organization, your vendors pose to your organization, is becoming just as important as understanding your own risk.
Yeah. Very much so. And I've spent a lot of time developing threat assessments for third parties so they can understand what the community view on these issues is. So it's really, really important, particularly at the strategic level, but also at the tactical level you're talking about there. So thank you for that. Colin, can I turn to yourself now? People have been taught, maybe so enamored by threat intelligence, they've gone away afterwards, they're going to build a team, they're going to go for, get some advanced analytics. Do you think these sorts of technologies like advanced analytics require a dedicated intelligence team within organizations?
No, just simple. Let me expand upon that a little bit. I mean, the CNCTI survey every year, surveys both us security vendors as well as the community, and reverberates that is distributed. And doing CTI assessments, cyber intelligence assessments with our clients here at IBM, I see that as well. Sometimes that they'll bring in intelligence analysts that have worked in the military but haven't worked in the corporate world, or maybe even not in operations, and don't know how to translate those things. As well as I've seen teams very successful that have put it in vulnerability management, or maybe even some of the incident response pieces, that it's where your skill set is and how you can tease that out and add value to the business. Again, intelligence is taking information and making it, contextualizing it, and readying it for action for the business. So really, I've seen teams all across the board, mostly, probably 50% dedicated, but I've seen them successful when it's not dedicated as well. It just depends on how you're using it, as well as what needs to be done.
Yeah, I think the more one can integrate it into the core security discipline, the better off you're going to be, because it's going to inform so much of discussions and debates and decisions and recommendations you make. So absolutely agree there. Eric, I'm going to turn to you last of all. You're the technology specialist here amongst us all. Where's technology going in the future? What's on the horizon for developing security analytics?
Yeah, I'm going to do my best to keep this short. So, right, from my perspective, we're finally getting to the point where we can start using these really cutting edge technologies, right? So a lot of advances have been made to make really, really cutting edge, state of the art machine learning technologies super accessible. Hardware is getting a little bit cheaper, kind of. I don't know if you've tried to buy a GPU lately. You can, at least, is news. That's good. At least they're available, kind of. Right. So we're getting a little bit more access to these things. And we, as a security community, are becoming a little bit more comfortable and a little bit more familiar with these technologies, and we kind of understand the power of them. So just as like a brief example from my work is there's this machine learning model called the transformer, which is like whatever. It's a language model, right? And I've recently been able to use them in my work to basically take that big volume of data, and when it's text data, when it's natural language data, I can make it a lot easier, right? I can turn it into bite-sized chunks. And that has made it a lot simpler to build these pipelines where people could push data into a system and then out would come, content, right? And instead, we can sort of take people and put them on the outside of that system, so they just have to make sure that it is reasonable, what comes out of it, right? Which alleviates the burden. So what I think is on the horizon for us in terms of security analytics is more adoption of things that do some of the work for us and say, hey, does this look right? Right, we're seeing a lot more work in causal models, right? To say this factor, and this factor made me do this thing. Does that seem right to you? And should I quarantine that asset? Like, that's a useful thing. And we're approaching the point where we have to just bear the cognitive load of validation instead of creation. So I'm really excited. I could probably talk in even more depth about things like we're seeing advances in technology called graph neural networks, and a lot of security data is inherently graph structured, and so advances there can help us, integrate all of that good work that's being used in like drug discovery to also work in like anomalous process discovery. So yeah, there's a lot of really good stuff coming, and a lot of it just comes from putting models into our processes that we already have.
Brilliant, Eric. Thank you very much indeed for that. I'd like to thank all my panelists for a really stimulating conversation. I think we could have gone for another couple of hours on this topic alone, but we've got to call it to a close. So I'm going to ask my panelists to go in turn to give us their takeaways for the audience this evening. So over to you, Eric. You're first up with your takeaway.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, my key takeaway is that this is an evolving field, right? Threat intelligence, as was said, doesn't need to be an island unto itself, right? You just use it to inform your processes and integrate threat intelligence, integrate whatever analytics you have into the process you have, and just make sure to keep your eye on, where things are going, and make sure that it's still providing value to you and your organization.
Thanks very much indeed, Eric. Colin, over to you for your final takeaway.
Thanks. And of course, IBM Security, we publish a couple different reports every year. The Threat Intelligence Index is soon to be published here in 2022, the cost of a data breach, as well as that if you want to dig any further, I have a couple blogs out there that I've written on some of those topics. We here at IBM Security are able to help you where you're at. Whether it's from a technology standpoint, whether from a process standpoint or analytics, we can help train you. We can help augment from a staffing standpoint. We can meet you where you're at.
Thanks very much, Colin. Alan, your final takeaway, sir.
So I think the big thing that we've kind of learned today, and it's been kind of hammered home, is that intelligence is a process, and you have to continue to evolve the type of collection that you're using and how you're using that intelligence within your organization. But doing that, you can continue to get protection. So it's not about the latest whiz-bang toy. It's about better use of your processes internally to provide the most actionable intelligence for your organization.
Thank you very much indeed, Alan. And the final word for this afternoon, the final takeaway, is over to you, Dov.
Yeah, I think the quote that comes to mind is "perfect is the enemy of good," meaning getting intelligence perfect is really hard. No one can do it. You're always going to miss stuff. There are always the unknown unknowns. You're always going to be overwhelmed with data. But try to be good. Try to have some sort of impact on your organization that allow threat intel to have some sort of impact. And if it's a little impact, that's better than no impact. So aim for good. Aim for small steps and increase the program as it goes on.
Thank you very much indeed, Dov, and thank you again for my panelists. I really enjoyed this afternoon's conversation. It's a pleasure to talk to you all. With that, I will hand back to Kelly. Over to you, my dear.
All right. Thanks, Colin. That was a great discussion, and I know our audience appreciates all of that great information today. And listeners, please check out the additional supporting resources on the ITGRC forum. And for those of you who qualify for CPE credit, your certificate will be issued within 7 days from our learning management system at grccpeacademy.org. So please watch out for the email notification on that, and check your spam if it doesn't come through. Also, please note that internal company browsers may block downloads from our system, so you may need to get us whitelisted by your system administrator, or alternatively, you can use an external browser. Join Join us again later this month for cyber risk ratings in the context of social engineering. You can reserve your seat now through the console, but before you do that, please do take a moment to leave us a rating and feedback for today's session. We value feedback and it helps us to plan for future events. So that's it for today. I'd like to thank our speakers for your participation, with a special thanks to our sponsors, Cyber6Guild, Rapid7, Recorded Future, and IBM, without whom this event would not be possible. And of course, thanks again for listening. Please stay tuned for our next event, and have a great day, everyone.